He shuffled in wearing handcuffs, head down, thin as a rail. The metal chains clinked with each step, echoing off the marble floors like a funeral bell. The jacket draped over his shoulders looked like it had survived wars, not winters. Underneath, you could see torn fabric that might have once been a military uniform, faded patches, loose threads, the ghost of what once meant something. His boots told the real story. One had a hole so big his sock showed through, stained with rainwater and shame. The other was held together with duct tape, gray and peeling. When he walked, you could hear the squeak of wet leather against concrete. Marcus Washington, 68 years old, no fixed address. Arrested for disturbing the peace. His crime? Sleeping in the parking lot of Jimmy's Diner during a thunderstorm that dumped 3 inches of rain in 2 hours. Between rusted shopping carts and the smell of old grease mixed with motor oil, he just wanted to survive the night without drowning. The courtroom felt sterile, almost hostile. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made his hollow cheeks look even deeper. The air smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. People in pressed suits avoided eye contact, shuffling papers louder than necessary. Too frail to be a threat, too invisible to be someone, too broken to matter. But they were wrong about that last part. If you believe no one should be treated this way, type honor below. Your voice matters more than you think. The prosecutor adjusted his tie impatiently, shuffling papers like he had somewhere better to be. The public defender hadn't even shown up yet. To everyone there, this was just another case, another homeless vet disrupting the peace. Nothing that required special attention. But Judge Sarah Coleman wasn't like everyone else. Seated at the front of the room, she read through the file with eyes trained by routine. She flipped pages without hurry until something made her stop. Her gaze froze on the defendant's full name, Marcus James Washington. Her body went rigid. An old memory she kept locked away like a scar suddenly surfaced with crushing force. It was the name her son repeated in emails sent from dusty outposts, always followed by the same phrase. If it wasn't for him, I'd never have made it home. Michael Coleman, staff sergeant, killed by an IED 3 years after returning. But before he died, he'd written with the admiration of a young soldier about a man who'd saved him in the field. A sergeant, stubborn, quiet, brave. She looked back at the defendant, head down, eyes lost, shoulders curved. He was unrecognizable and yet unmistakable at the same time. Time had destroyed him, but it was him. Sarah swallowed hard, tried to keep her expression neutral, but the hand holding her pen trembled. The institutional coldness of the room seemed absurd in the face of this revelation. The hero from her son's stories, handcuffed for seeking shelter from a storm. The bailiff's voice cut through her thoughts. Docket number 847, State versus Marcus Washington. Disturbing the peace, trespassing. Marcus sat motionless in the defendant's chair. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his weathered face. His hands, calloused and scarred, rested flat on the table. On his left forearm, barely visible through a tear in his sleeve, was an old scar, jagged, deep. Sarah recognized it immediately from Michael's descriptions. The scar on Sergeant Washington's arm, Michael had written, runs from his wrist to his elbow. Got it pulling me out of that burning Humvee. He says it doesn't hurt anymore, but I see him rub it when he thinks no one's looking. The prosecutor droned on about vagrancy laws and repeat offenses. Marcus didn't react. He sat like a man who'd already accepted whatever the world decided to impose on him. The sound of rain still echoed faintly through the building's windows. The same storm that had driven him to seek shelter. Sarah wrote something on a note, folded it carefully, and called a bailiff over. The order was clear. Take this to Attorney David Harrison, personally. The bailiff left without question. In front of her, Marcus lifted his eyes for just a brief second. The two looked at each other. She wanted to say something, but couldn't. Not here. Not yet. The prosecutor's voice grew sharper, more dismissive. Your Honor, we have a repeat offender here. Mr. Washington has been cited multiple times for loitering, public intoxication, and now trespassing. The business owner of Jimmy's Diner called police because customers were complaining. Marcus flinched at the word customers. His fingers touched the torn sleeve unconsciously, tracing the scar beneath. The gesture was so small, so automatic, that only Sarah noticed. The defendant was found sleeping between two dumpsters, the prosecutor continued, surrounded by empty bottles and disturbing paying customers trying to enjoy their meals. The lie hung in the air like smoke. There had been no bottles. The police report mentioned none. But Marcus said nothing. He'd learned long ago that his word meant nothing against a badge and a pressed suit. A few people in the gallery whispered. Someone's phone buzzed. A woman in the back row looked at Marcus with the kind of disgust reserved for things people step over on sidewalks. The fluorescent light above flickered, casting intermittent shadows that made everything feel unstable. The courtroom smelled like industrial disinfectant and old coffee. The air conditioning hummed too loud, drowning out the sound of Marcus's quiet breathing. He sat perfectly still, military posture buried under years of defeat, but still there, still holding him upright. Furthermore, the prosecutor added with theatrical flair, vagrancy of this nature creates a public health hazard and diminishes property values in the surrounding area. Sarah watched Marcus's face carefully. No anger. No defiance. Just acceptance. The same quiet endurance that had once made him drag wounded soldiers through minefields was now keeping him silent while strangers decided his fate. The public defender finally arrived, 20 minutes late, briefcase soaked from the rain. He glanced at the file for maybe 30 seconds before standing. "Your Honor, my client pleads no contest. We request time served and community service." No contest. Not even a fight. Marcus looked down at his hands. The scar on his forearm caught the light again. Sarah remembered another line from Michael's emails. Sergeant Washington never complains about anything. Not the heat, not the food, not getting shot at. He just does what needs doing and moves on. I wish I was half as strong. The prosecutor smiled, sensing victory. The state recommends 30 days county jail and a $1,000 fine, Your Honor. It's time to send a message that this behavior won't be tolerated. The gallery nodded approvingly. Easy math. One less homeless person on the streets. One less problem to step around. But then the courtroom door opened with a bang that made everyone turn. "David Harrison, attorney at law," announced a tall man in a dark suit. His voice cut through the room like a blade. "I'm here to represent Mr. Washington." The prosecutor barely hid his sneer. "Last-minute representation, Your Honor. Highly irregular." Sarah's voice was steady as steel. "Accepted. Proceed, Mr. Harrison." David Harrison wasn't just any lawyer. He was a name everyone in Houston knew, a presence in high-profile cases that made headlines. He didn't usually appear in cases like this, but he was here for a reason only Sarah understood. Harrison flipped through the file quickly, asked simple questions, bought time, challenged the prosecution. In minutes, he dismantled the prosecutor's argument using basic principles of humanity and legality. There's no trespassing when there's no intent to steal or damage property. There's desperation, survival, and social abandonment. The prosecutor fought back, talking about repeat behavior. Harrison countered, "What repeats here isn't crime. It's neglect." The room fell silent. Meanwhile, Sarah kept her eyes fixed on Marcus. He remained distant, as if he were somewhere else entirely. He didn't seem to recognize Harrison, or even himself, but Harrison was beginning to suspect something. This man wasn't just any homeless veteran. There was something in his posture. Even weakened, there was still discipline there, still dignity buried under years of abandonment. During a brief recess, Harrison approached Sarah in the hallway. "Now tell me who he really is." Sarah hesitated, then spoke quietly. "The man who saved my son's life." Harrison stared at her for several seconds, then nodded without looking back. "Then we're not letting this slide as just another case." Back in the courtroom, Sarah made a decision that went against every protocol she knew. She stood up, stepped down from the bench, and walked toward Marcus. The entire room went silent. Judges don't leave their seats during proceedings. She stopped 3 feet from him. Marcus looked up, confused. Sarah reached into her robe pocket and pulled out something small, a set of dog tags, tarnished with age. She placed them gently on the table in front of him. "These belong to Staff Sergeant Michael Coleman," she said quietly, so only Marcus could hear. He wanted you to have them. Marcus stared at the tags. His hand trembled as he reached for them. When his fingers touched the metal, his breathing changed. The courtroom watched in absolute silence as this broken man held the tags against his chest. Sarah returned to her seat. No one spoke. No one moved. Marcus closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he wasn't alone. Not a sound. And yet, the room changed. What happened next wasn't supposed to happen in a routine disturbing the peace case. David Harrison stood and addressed the court with the gravity of a man about to rewrite history. Your Honor, I request permission to present evidence regarding the true identity and service record of Marcus James Washington. He placed a thick folder on the table, documents that no one expected to see in that courtroom. Pentagon letterhead, classified mission reports, commendation records that had been buried in military bureaucracy for over a decade. Marcus Washington, Harrison began, didn't just serve his country. He prevented the deaths of at least 6 American soldiers during an IED attack in Kandahar province, Afghanistan, in 2009. The prosecutor's confident expression began to crack. The gallery leaned forward. Harrison read from an official military report. Sergeant Washington remained in position under heavy fire after ensuring the evacuation of 3 wounded soldiers. His voluntary decision to stay provided crucial time for squad reorganization and prevented additional casualties. The silence in the room was absolute. You couldn't hear papers rustling or shoes shuffling anymore. Furthermore, Harrison continued, Sergeant Washington was recommended for the Bronze Star and Purple Heart, but the paperwork was lost in a bureaucratic transfer. He was medically discharged due to PTSD and traumatic brain injury, then forgotten by the system he served. Sarah's voice was firm, but her eyes were filled with tears. What we have here isn't just a case, it's a portrait of systemic failure. A man who served with honor, who was forgotten through administrative errors, and who now, ironically, sits in this defendant's chair when he should be receiving honors. She gestured toward the back of the courtroom. 2 military officers entered. One carried a small blue box. Inside it, a Purple Heart, an honor delayed by 15 years. Marcus looked at it without understanding. It took seconds for him to process what he was seeing. When he realized what it was, his first reaction was to refuse. No, he said quietly. I didn't save Michael. He died because I failed. Sarah approached, not as a judge, but as a mother. He lived because of you. He came home, he wrote to me, he described you as the bravest man he'd ever known, and he asked me to find you if anything ever happened to him. Marcus didn't respond. He just cried. And in that courtroom that had only seen him as a trespasser, everyone stood up. The prosecutor, the court clerk, the officers, the people in the gallery. No one said anything. No one needed to. Harrison's voice filled the silence. The evidence shows that Marcus Washington single-handedly saved 6 lives, including that of Staff Sergeant Michael Coleman, who lived for 3 additional years because of this man's courage. He dragged wounded soldiers through enemy fire, stayed behind to provide cover, and carried this burden alone for 15 years. Sarah took a deep breath. All charges are dismissed. The state will immediately begin processing all benefits and medical care owed to Sergeant Washington under federal veterans legislation. The military officer stepped forward and pinned the Purple Heart to Marcus's torn jacket. Marcus touched the metal with shaking fingers, then looked up at Sarah. Thank you, he whispered, for remembering. If you believe dignity always finds its voice even in silence, subscribe now. It's how we remember what must never be forgotten. What should have been just administrative paperwork became a moment of historical reparation. Marcus was called back to the courthouse the following week, but this time not as a defendant, as an honoree. The courtroom wasn't packed like before. There was no curious crowd or hurried journalists. It was a more contained, intimate environment. Harrison stood beside him along with 2 officers from the Houston VA, now dressed in ceremonial uniforms. And Sarah, from her position as judge, could no longer hide what she felt. She wasn't just a judge. She was Michael's mother. She was someone who carried the same debt the country owed this man. Marcus entered wearing new clothes. A simple suit, Clean, beard trimmed, body still bent, but different, not from age, but from the weight of the past, a weight that was finally beginning to lift. He was called to the center of the room. One of the officers read in a firm voice, "For proven bravery in combat, conduct involving personal risk, and direct contribution to the survival of members of the armed forces, the United States Army posthumously awards the Bronze Star to Sergeant Marcus James Washington." The blue box was opened. The metal gleamed under the courtroom lights, but Marcus didn't move. He looked at the decoration like someone seeing a broken mirror. He breathed deeply and spoke with a broken voice. "I don't deserve this." He died. The silence was immediate. Harrison approached, placed a hand on his shoulder. "But he lived long enough to come home, to write, to thank you, and to tell a mother that you were the reason he still had hope." Sarah stood up, stepped down from the bench. "Death doesn't erase what was saved, Sergeant. You gave my son time, and you gave our family more than words can explain." Marcus squeezed his eyes shut. A sob escaped. He still carried guilt like someone carrying an old rifle. "I just did what anyone would do," he said in almost a whisper. The officer handed him the medal. Marcus held it with both hands, not knowing whether to wear it or just look at it. Finally, he closed his eyes and pressed his forehead against it. "Thank you," he said with difficulty, "for not forgetting me completely." The next gesture didn't come from Sarah or from the military officers. It came from the prosecutor. He stood up, straightened his posture, and saluted. The entire room followed, not from protocol, but from respect. Outside, rain had stopped. Sunlight streamed through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Marcus walked out slowly, metal pinned to his chest, Harrison beside him. For the first time in 15 years, he wasn't walking alone. Some heroes don't wear their medals, but sometimes the medals find them anyway. If you typed honor earlier, thank you. If you subscribed, welcome. And if this story moved you, we stand together even in silence.